My name is Lillian Prescott. I'm 80 years old. And for nearly a year, I was treated like a piece of forgotten furniture. Sat in a corner, silent, invisible, while my own children spoke over me like I didn't have a mind anymore. I used to be the kind of woman you called when everything was falling apart. Church finances, school board drama, family breakdowns, even who to vote for in small-town council elections. People came to me for direction. And I gave it with confidence, with love. But that all changed the morning I had the stroke. It happened during breakfast. I was spreading butter on a warm biscuit in my kitchen in Lancaster, Georgia. The kind of morning I'd lived 1,000 times before. Sunlight slanting across my countertop, birdsong peeking through the window. Then suddenly I couldn't move my right hand. My leg buckled. The butter knife clattered to the floor. And my tongue, once so sharp, became heavy and useless. I fell hard, biscuit still in hand. Next thing I knew, I was staring up at paramedics with blinking lights behind them. Then came the hospital. Then rehab. Then pity. And then came my children. My daughter, Helen, a CPA who ran my late husband's family logistics firm like a queen on a throne, was suddenly making decisions without me. My son, Jeremy, who hadn't visited in 6 months, was now lecturing nurses about my medications as if he cared. But the worst part wasn't what they said. It was how they looked at me. Like I was broken glass. And when I was discharged, they brought me to Helen's house. Not to help me recover. Not to keep me comfortable. But to sit me in a corner of her spotless sunroom. They put a soft recliner there, facing a window with no view. They laid out lap blankets and said things like, "We just want you to rest now, Mama." As if my fire had burned out. They didn't know I was still burning. The stroke had taken my speech for a while. My right hand too. But it hadn't touched my mind. Not the part that remembered how Helen never wanted the family business. Not the part that remembered how she used to mock it. Call it Granddaddy's old trucking circus. And not the part that had built that business from one rusty box truck and a notepad full of deliveries. No, I still remembered everything. Every number. Every deal. Every cheat my late husband's cousin tried to pull before I threw him out. I remembered because I was the business. But they had forgotten. So they left me there, day after day, talking over my head, bringing me meals like offerings to a forgotten God. They whispered about selling the company. About turning it into an e-commerce logistics arm. And shifting it toward modern platforms. Helen's husband, Glenn, even started meeting clients in my office chair. They thought I couldn't even spell the word logistics anymore. But they were wrong. Because while they slept, I taught myself how to use my left hand. I dragged a whiteboard into my corner, scribbling letters slowly until my fingers obeyed again. I listened to every phone call they made, every deal they planned. And I planned something too. Not revenge. Resurrection. But one night, just as I was scribbling out an old client's contact on a pad of paper tucked under my throw pillow, I heard something that made my blood run cold. "Helen." On the phone. "I know the shares aren't hers legally," she whispered. "She never had anything notarized. If we move before she recovers, if she ever does, it's clean." Froze. They weren't just sidelining me. They were planning to erase me. My history. My business. They thought the stroke had silenced me. But they had no idea. Because I had already begun to write again. And the person I was writing to, an old friend. One who owed me a favor. One who was a lawyer. Now I had a new goal. Not just to stand again. But to take it all back. And maybe, just maybe, make them watch me do it. It's strange how time slows down when you're no longer seen. Days blur together, especially when you're treated more like furniture than family. After the stroke, I lost more than just words. I lost my place at the table, my name in the room, and the respect I spent a lifetime earning. They thought I didn't notice. But I did. I saw it in the way my daughter-in-law, Wendy, would whisper around me, always half tilting her head with that pitiful expression like I was some broken animal to be tolerated. And I saw it in my own son, Jared. The way he avoided my eyes, too cowardly to face the woman he used to call his rock. Now I was nothing but a ghost wearing slippers and a loose nightgown. But I wasn't gone. I was still here, Inside this stiff body and garbled voice was the same woman who'd built a boutique business from scratch, who'd outlasted recessions and raised 3 children single-handedly when her husband died young. I hadn't disappeared. I'd just been pushed into a corner, left to fade in the background like a forgotten photograph. The first few weeks after the stroke were the worst. I couldn't speak clearly. My tongue felt heavy, uncooperative. My handwriting, once elegant and flowing, looked like a child's. I couldn't even button my cardigan without help. And oh, how they loved reminding me. "Just rest, Mama," Wendy would say as she carried another tray of plain oatmeal to my little breakfast table in the sunroom. She never seasoned it, never added the blueberries I loved. "You've earned the right to sit back now. Sit back." I didn't survive 8 decades just to sit and rot like a neglected houseplant. But the more I tried to assert myself, the more they coddled me. Or worse, ignored me. Jared moved his office into the downstairs study, where I used to keep my filing cabinets and client records. Now, those papers sat in boxes stacked in the garage, collecting dust beside old paint cans and broken Christmas lights. He took over the business. Just like that. Prescott Textiles had been my lifeblood for 30 years. What began as a local drapery shop in our basement had grown into a modestly successful wholesale operation supplying hotels and nursing homes across the state. I knew every thread count, every supplier relationship, every custom order by heart. But when I had my stroke, they filed the paperwork, transferred power of attorney, shifted the ownership, and locked me out of my own accounts. Wendy told me it was just temporary, that they needed to protect the business. That was a lie. And they knew it. What hurt more than the betrayal was the quietness of it all, the way they acted like it was love. Like stripping away my independence was a favor. No screaming, no confrontation. Just silence and a steady chipping away of my dignity until I wasn't Lillian Prescott anymore. I was just Nana. I watched Wendy answer calls in my office. I listened to Jared fumble through supplier negotiations I used to handle with precision. They thought I didn't understand, but I heard everything. And that's when I decided, if they were going to underestimate me, then I'd make sure they regretted it. But I had to start small. My stroke had left me with a limp, and I struggled to hold a pen for longer than a few seconds. Speaking took concentration. But I still had my mind, sharp as ever. And with that I began to plan. First I needed to rebuild. Every morning, after Wendy and Jared left the house and the nurse went down for her coffee break, I'd pull out the yellow legal pad I hid under the cushion of my reading chair. I forced my hands to hold a pen, even when they trembled. I copied words from old newspapers and books, retraining my muscles, teaching my fingers to obey. SPOL. WINDOWDRISCNG. SILIENT. Some days I cried in frustration. My hand cramped. My letters slanted. But I didn't stop. And when my words finally made sense on the page again, I moved on to typing. I stole back the old laptop Wendy kept in the guest room closet. It was slow, dusty, and missing a few keys, but it worked. I cleared the browser history, made sure no one could track what I was doing. Because what I was doing wasn't just for me. It was for every woman who'd been dismissed. Every elder cast aside like expired milk. I was going to take back what was mine, and I was going to do it while they slept. Every night I studied the business. I accessed supplier accounts with backup passwords only I remembered. I read inventory reports Jared didn't even know existed. I discovered emails, messages from unhappy clients who noticed the quality had dropped, who missed Lillian's touch. Some said they were considering switching suppliers. That's when the spark lit. I wasn't just going to reclaim Prescott Textiles. I was going to rebuild it without them. But first I needed help. Discreet help. That's when I thought of Cheryl. Cheryl was the daughter of my old friend and accountant, Maggie, sharp, loyal, and computer savvy. She used to visit me on weekends as a teenager, fascinated by my fabric samples and color palettes. Now in her 30s, she worked in design and marketing in Raleigh. I hadn't spoken to her in years. So I wrote her a letter. Real one. No emails. Nothing digital. I explained everything. My stroke, the betrayal, the business. I asked for her discretion. And I told her, in no uncertain terms, that I was about to make the biggest comeback of my life. I mailed it from the mailbox down the block, taking a whole afternoon just to walk there with my cane, heart pounding with every step. 3 days later I heard the knock. It was a Sunday morning. Wendy had gone out to brunch with friends. Jared was in his study. I opened the door and there she stood. Cheryl, hair in a messy bun, eyes wide with determination. "I got your letter," she said. And I swear in that moment I felt like I could breathe again. She stepped inside, shut the door behind her and whispered, "Let's get to work." For the first time in months I smiled. A real smile. 'Cause now, I wasn't alone. And the fight had just begun. There's a peculiar kind of rage that comes from being forgotten while you're still alive. Doesn't scream. It doesn't burn fast. No, it simmers, quiet, steady, until it becomes something more powerful than anger. Something focused. Something dangerous. I had spent months trapped in the shell they placed me in. The useless old woman who shuffled slowly, nodded politely, and kept her silence. But inside, I was sharpening every edge they'd dulled. And now I had Cheryl. She wasn't just a godsend, she was my lifeline. We met in secret at least once a week. Sometimes early mornings, sometimes late at night, always under the excuse of a neighbor dropping off something from the garden, or one of my bridge ladies. No one suspected a thing. Wendy barely noticed anything beyond her hair appointments and weekend yoga retreats. Jared had long since stopped looking me in the eye. That was his first mistake. During those clandestine meetings, Cheryl and I built something that felt like resurrection. She brought her laptop, a portable scanner, and notebooks filled with ideas. I brought decades of client knowledge, sketches I'd done in my downtime, and an uncanny memory of supplier contacts I hadn't spoken to since before the stroke. Prescott Textiles was officially under Jared's name now, but the soul of it, that still belonged to me. "You still got it," Cheryl said one evening as we reviewed fabric swatch mock-ups I designed in the margins of the newspaper. "No," I told her. "I never lost it. They just stopped looking." Our goal wasn't just to recover what I'd built, it was to evolve it. Modernize it. Make it sharper, leaner, smarter. Cheryl helped set up a new LLC under a different name, Tulip House Textiles. A nod to the tulips in my garden. A symbol of rebirth. We created a small but elegant website, registered a new domain, and began quietly reaching out to a handful of my oldest and most loyal clients. I typed every email with slow but determined fingers. My speech was still halting, but on paper I was fluent again. And what happened next? It surprised even me. Within 2 weeks, 3 boutique hotels, ones that had worked with Prescott Textiles for years, signed contracts with Tulip House instead. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was justice. A silent reclaiming of everything they thought I no longer deserved. But with every win I had to be careful. One slip, one overheard call, and everything would unravel. Wendy had a knack for snooping, and Jared, though clueless, had moments of suspicion. "You're looking sharper these days, Ma," he said one afternoon as I poured my own coffee instead of waiting to be served. "I suppose the corner isn't as comfortable as it used to be," I replied. He chuckled. He thought it was a joke. It wasn't. But if I was making moves in the shadows, Wendy was becoming more brazen in the light. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone, pacing the kitchen while I sat motionless on the porch. "No, she's not involved anymore," she said, voice tight. "The business is ours now. She doesn't even remember half the clients. She barely speaks." She laughed. And I'll never forget the way it cut through me. I mean, I love her, she's family, but she's like a ghost, really. Sweet but gone. Sweet but gone. That one stayed with me. And so, the next time Cheryl came, I handed her something I'd been saving for months. A copy of the original Prescott Textiles operating agreement, tucked away in the back of an old recipe book in my bedroom. Cheryl read it slowly, eyes narrowing. "Did they ever legally dissolve this version?" she asked. "No," I said. And my name was never removed from the original supplier licenses. Her grin widened. Then we're not just starting a new business. He nodded. We're taking back the old one. The plan shifted that day. We stopped playing it small. We mapped out everything. How to transfer active accounts back to my name, how to challenge Jared's unauthorized changes in court if needed, and how to expose what they'd done to me, should it come to that. But it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about dignity. About rewriting the narrative they thought they'd locked away in that forgotten corner of the house. And then came the storm. It was a Thursday. The kind of day where the sky darkens too early and the rain hits sideways. Wendy had gone out shopping, probably to spend money she thought came from her savvy leadership, and Jared was on a call in the living room. I was in the back den, sorting invoices with Cheryl when we heard the voice. Mom! It was my granddaughter, Ruby. She was 13, curious, too smart for her own good. She stood in the hallway, clutching her school bag, eyes wide as she stared at Cheryl and the stack of files on the table. What's going on? Froze. But Cheryl, cool as ever. Homework, she said. I'm helping your grandmother with word exercises. Ruby didn't move. She stared at the papers, then back at me. Grandma, she said slowly. Are you working? I swallowed hard. And then something inside me, something wild and old and proud, rose up. Yes, I said. Clear as day. The clearest word I'd spoken in months. Yes, I am. And Ruby, bless her young, untarnished heart, grinned. That's awesome. Then she walked away. I turned to Cheryl, heart pounding, and whispered, We're running out of time. She nodded. We had to move faster. Because people were starting to notice. And if Ruby figured it out, others would too. We needed a reveal. A moment of impact. A comeback they couldn't ignore. So we set a date. 4 weeks from that day, we would launch Tulip House Textiles with a bang. Press release. A trade announcement. Client showcase. A story of triumph. And I would be front and center. But just when everything felt ready, something happened. File disappeared. A supplier account was mysteriously locked. And Cheryl received a text from an unknown number. Stay out of things that aren't yours. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And they were ready to fight. I always thought battles were loud. Swords clashing. Voices raised. Doors slammed. But this war. This one was fought in whispers. In deleted emails. In subtle glances across dinner tables. It wasn't fought in daylight. It brewed in the silence between sentences, in the space where love should have been. After Ruby stumbled on Cheryl and me that day, the ground under my feet began to shift. Started small. Wendy began knocking before entering my room. Jared stopped leaving his laptop unattended on the kitchen counter. Even the mail, which they used to toss on the table without a thought, was suddenly filtered, as if they were making sure I didn't see something. But they were too late. I'd already seen enough. One evening, while Cheryl and I reviewed a list of outstanding vendor contracts for Tulip House, my eyes fell on a name I hadn't spoken aloud in 20 years. Carolina Teague. Froze. Cheryl noticed. You okay? That name, I whispered, tapping the screen with a trembling finger. She was my first investor. Back when this was just a dream and not a business. I hadn't heard from Carolina in decades, but there she was, renewing a contract with Jared's version of my company. Which meant one thing: they were using my network. My legacy. My blood, sweat, and reputation. Without me. Cheryl tracked the transaction trail. What we found made my stomach turn. Jared had rebranded Prescott Textiles contracts, pushing the narrative that he'd rescued the company from financial ruin after I became mentally unfit. He even changed my title in the company archive, from founder and creative director to former staff consultant. I wasn't just being erased. I was being rewritten. They're rewriting your story, Lillian, Cheryl said softly. Well, not anymore. It was time I wrote it myself. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in bed with a pen in one hand and my notebook in the other, staring out the window at the dark outline of the moon behind the oak tree in the yard. They thought I was useless. They thought they could put me in a corner and toss my legacy into the trash with yesterday's mail. But I had something they didn't: time. Time to remember every contact, every deal, every favor called in, and every lesson learned. I didn't need the internet. I had lived it. The next day, Cheryl and I drove to a nearby town. She'd rented a small office space under Tulip House Textiles, our new HQ, a room with big windows and even bigger ambition. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. We set up meetings with old clients, quiet, strategic coffee dates with people who remembered me not as a patient, but as a powerhouse. And one by one they returned. A wedding boutique in Nashville, a boutique hotel in Vermont, a set designer for an indie film who remembered how I hand-delivered swatches to her during a snowstorm in '94. They all came back. And Tulip House was no longer just a side project. It was competition. Real competition. But back at the house, tension thickened. Wendy snapped at the smallest things. Jared started asking Ruby strange questions. What did Grandma talk about today? Was anyone here when I was gone? They knew something was shifting. Then one morning I caught Jared standing outside my room, his phone recording through a crack in the door. I pretended not to notice. But inside, I started planning. Not just to win. To expose them. Cheryl and I agreed. We needed proof of what they'd done to me. Evidence. So we staged a moment. One evening I asked Wendy to help me bathe. A request I hadn't made in weeks. She was annoyed but came anyway, huffing like a martyr. You know, Lillian, she muttered as she scrubbed my back. Jared and I did you a favor. You were slipping. Everyone said so. If we hadn't taken over, there wouldn't be anything left of Prescott. I said nothing. She continued. You should be grateful. At least we didn't put you in a home. Still I said nothing. But Cheryl had hidden a voice recorder in my towel drawer. We had everything. And the final nail. The bank statement Cheryl found the next day. Jared had funneled company money into a personal account named Prosperity Futures, a shady LLC registered out of state. He wasn't just a thief of legacy. He was a thief, period. That Sunday, I sat across from him at the breakfast table. Ruby was reading a book. Wendy scrolled her phone. Jared ate eggs like a man without a care in the world. I stirred my tea slowly. You've been busy, haven't you, Jared? He looked up, confused. Oh, sitting in corners. Reading. Relearning how to walk. And thinking about what I'd say. When I finally decided to come back. Wendy laughed, not realizing I was serious. But Jared. He froze. And in that moment, when our eyes locked, I knew he felt it. The war was no longer quiet. It was coming. The Sunday morning sun spilled through the kitchen windows like nothing had changed. The toaster clicked. The coffee pot gurgled. Wendy hummed tunelessly as she scrolled her phone, tapping at it with those long red nails like she was swiping away guilt itself. But I had changed. I sat at the end of the table in my soft blue robe, my hair brushed back, lips painted in the exact coral shade I used to wear when I met with clients back in the day. Ruby noticed. Grandma, you look pretty, she said, beaming. I smiled at her gently. She had no idea how much I needed to hear that. No idea what today meant. Jared sat across from me with a smugness he didn't bother to hide anymore. You sleep okay, Mom? He asked, as if we were just a normal family sharing a normal breakfast. I looked at him and said, like a woman with nothing left to lose. The air shifted. Wendy lowered her phone. Ruby looked confused. And Jared? Well, for the first time in a long time, he blinked like a man about to be punched in the face. I have something to say, I said loud and clear, so my voice carried through every crack in the house. They stopped moving. I know what you did, I continued. All of it. The business. The house. The lies. Wendy stood up. What are you talking about? I ignored her. You took my stroke as a free pass to erase me. You declared me mentally unfit without a single doctor's report. You siphoned money from the company and rewrote my role in it. And when I started getting better, you panicked. Jared scoffed. That's ridiculous. You've had health problems. We were protecting you. Don't lie to my face, Jared. You left me in that corner like a forgotten doll. You stripped away my name from what I built. And worst of all, you taught your daughter that age means invisibility. His jaw tensed. And now, continued, I've rebuilt everything. From scratch. With no help from you. I reached for the manila folder next to my teacup. Cheryl had helped me organize it. Contracts, signatures, dates, and bank statements. But the most damning piece was right on top. The audio file transcription of Wendy's little bathroom rant about how they had done me a favor. I slid the folder down the table toward them like a poker hand with 4 aces. This is going to the board, I said. Tulip House has replaced Prescott Textiles in over half the vendor contracts. Your days of pretending to run my company are over. You can't do that, Jared hissed. Oh, but I already did. I've got investor backing. I got clients. I've even got the very first employee you ever laid off. Marta is back, and she's running circles around your team. Wendy paled. Jared stood up. You're not well, he said. You're not thinking clearly. Sit down, Jared, I said. Don't embarrass yourself. His hands balled into fists. I saw the moment the fear crossed his face, when he realized that he'd underestimated me. That the woman he tried to cast aside had come back stronger than ever. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to resign from Prescott Textiles. Publicly. With a statement I will write. You'll transfer all remaining accounts to me and sign over the house you bought with company funds. This is blackmail, Wendy whispered. This is accountability. That evening, Cheryl and I sat in her apartment with Chinese takeout and a bottle of Pinot Noir. I wasn't celebrating yet, but I had finally breathed. For the first time in years I felt like myself again. You know, Cheryl said, raising her glass. I used to think you were just another nice old lady. Smiled. Most people do. Until I come back swinging. She laughed. But beneath the laughter was respect. The kind I hadn't seen in a long time. The fallout came quick. Jared tried to deny everything. But between the evidence I provided and a few old clients who were happy to throw him under the bus, he folded like a cheap suit. The board removed him within a week. Wendy tried to play victim, crying about misunderstandings and being manipulated. But the audio file didn't lie. And neither did the silent, collective judgment of the people who had once trusted her with their grandmother's recipes and wedding gowns. The house was signed over within a month. I didn't move back in. I let Ruby keep the room she loved, but I turned the master suite into a writing den. My writing, my voice, my terms. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about rebirth. I started offering business workshops for women over 60. We called it Silver Grit. The waiting list grew so fast we had to rent a bigger space. Tulip House expanded into event design and custom installations. Cheryl and I hired a team of overlooked talent, women who had been cast aside after 50, just like I had. And every time I walked into a meeting, holding my cane in one hand and a blueprint in the other, I watched jaws drop. Not because they doubted me, but because they finally knew who I was. I wasn't just Lillian Prescott. I was a storm that learned how to walk again. And I wasn't done yet. If you believe that age is not weakness but wisdom wrapped in power, drop a comment below with, I'm not done yet. Like this video to support every comeback queen out there. And don't forget to subscribe for the next story. Because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. I once believed that building a business was the hardest thing I'd ever do. But I was wrong. The hardest thing was rebuilding myself, piece by trembling piece, after being told I was nothing. Not by strangers, but by my own son. By the family I fed, clothed, and protected. By the very people I loved most. But now, with Jared and Wendy gone from the company, with Tulip House rising like a phoenix from their betrayal, I stood at a crossroads. Not everything was healed. Not yet. But for the first time in years, I was choosing where the path led. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted redemption. Not just for myself, but for every woman who'd ever been silenced, forgotten, or written off after a health scare or a birthday with a 7 in front of it. I wanted to leave something behind that couldn't be stolen. So I began writing again. Not in secret this time. Not in a corner with dim light and fear hanging overhead. This time I wrote from my sunroom, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and the soft rustle of wind chimes outside. I wrote with the confidence of a woman who had tasted both hell and survival, and decided that her voice was too valuable to ever be hidden again. And one morning, while sipping my usual chamomile tea, an idea struck me so hard I nearly dropped the mug. What if I turned Tulip House into more than just a design company? What if it became a sanctuary? A creative studio for women over 60 who had been cast aside after retirement, but still had fire in their hearts. Called Cheryl. She showed up with her laptop before I even finished my second cup of tea. "You're serious?" she asked, eyes wide. "Dead serious," I said. "I'm not building a business anymore. I'm building a movement." We named the initiative Tulip Revival, a branch of the company dedicated to teaching workshops, offering free space for older women artists and entrepreneurs, and hosting speaker events from women who, like me, had comeback stories the world needed to hear. Our tagline: too wise to be wasted, too strong to be silenced. It was Cheryl who suggested we pitch a feature to the local business journal. I hesitated at first. Press always felt invasive. But she reminded me that visibility wasn't vanity. It was power. So I agreed. We invited a young journalist named Nora to my home for an interview. I expected another polite puff piece. But what I got was something far more important. Got an audience. The article hit the front page 2 weeks later. Full spread. The corner no more. Lillian Prescott's rise from silence to CO. It went viral not just locally but nationally. Apparently, people were hungry for stories that didn't end with a funeral or a sad nursing home shot. They wanted to believe that rebirth at 80 was possible. My email exploded. Women wrote in from everywhere. "I'm 73, and I thought it was too late to try again, until I saw your face. My daughter calls me too slow for the internet. Can I come to one of your classes? My granddaughter doesn't even know I used to run a bakery. You reminded me I still can." Each message wrapped around my heart like a hug I didn't know I needed. But it was one letter that brought me to tears. Not because it was full of praise but because it came from Ruby. My granddaughter. The same girl who had watched me suffer in silence, and had unknowingly mirrored her mother's cruelty with every dismissive glance. She wrote, "Dear Grandma, I saw the article. I read every word twice. And I cried. I'm sorry I didn't see you before. I'm sorry I let them treat you like furniture. Can we talk? Really talk? I want to know who you are, not just what they said you were." I held that letter to my chest like it was the first time someone called me human in a language I'd long forgotten. Ruby had been a child. But she was becoming a woman now. One who wanted to understand. And that meant more than any resignation letter from Jared or passive apology from Wendy. It meant I hadn't just reclaimed a company. I'd begun reclaiming my family. Ruby came by the next Saturday. Alone. She stood in the threshold of my sunroom, her eyes nervous, her fingers playing with the sleeves of her hoodie. "I brought pie," she said. "Good," I replied, standing with effort but pride. "Because I brought stories." We sat for hours. I told her about the early days. How I started the company with nothing but a typewriter and a sewing machine. How Jared once begged me to let him help when he was just 13. How I never imagined I'd one day become the obstacle in his eyes. Ruby listened. Really listened. And then she told me what I already feared. That Wendy had poisoned the well early. That she was taught not to bother Grandma because I was too tired or too sick or too confused. That Jared rarely spoke of me unless it was to explain why I wasn't involved anymore. And most painful of all, Ruby admitted she believed it. Until she saw me in the paper. Alive. Powerful. Clear-eyed and sharper than ever. "You looked like a queen," she whispered. Smiled. "I am one." She giggled. And something between us softened. I didn't know what would come next. Whether Ruby would stay in my life or drift like so many grandchildren do. But for that moment I had her back. And that meant the world. As Tulip Revival grew, so did the whispers. Other companies reached out, hoping to mimic the model. I was invited to speak at a women's business summit in Chicago. My first plane ride in years. On that stage I told my story. All of it. The stroke. The silence. The chair in the corner. The nights I cried because I couldn't remember my own signature. The mornings I practiced writing my name until the page bled ink. And then the rise. How I took back the life they tried to bury. By the time I stepped off that stage, women were sobbing. One came up to me, held my hand and said, "You just gave me my voice back." And that's when I knew. This story, my story, was never about revenge. It was about return. A return to self. Purpose. Power. If you've ever felt pushed aside, underestimated or silenced, let this chapter be your wake-up call. Drop a comment with "I'm still here" if you're reclaiming your story too. Like, share, and subscribe for the next chapter in Lillian's comeback. Trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The morning was still, save for the rustling of tulips outside the sunroom windows. I had just finished my tea and tucked my notebook away when a knock sounded at the door. 3 sharp raps, precise and familiar in rhythm. I knew that knock. It was Jared's. For a moment I didn't move. I sat in my wicker chair, breath shallow, waiting to see if it was my heart playing tricks again. But when the knock came again, softer this time, I stood slowly, my hands trembling as they reached the handle. Opened the door. There he was. My son. Older than I remembered. The stress of the past year carved into his face. His once perfectly styled hair was unkempt, and his shirt looked like it had been chosen in a rush. His eyes darted away from mine like a boy caught stealing cookies, and for a moment, I saw the child I used to know, before ambition turned him into a stranger. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't answer. I simply stepped aside. He entered the sunroom, looked around as though he hadn't truly seen it in years. "It hasn't changed," he murmured. "No," I replied, lowering myself back into the chair. "But we have." He winced. "I read the article," he said. "Most people have," I answered, meeting his eyes. "That's what happens when truth makes a noise after being kept silent for too long." He nodded, then sat across from me, elbows on his knees, hands wringing. "I came to apologize." "Did you come because you're sorry?" I asked. "Or because your reputation is bleeding in the street?" That cut him. He looked up, shame flooding his face. "I came because Ruby told me everything. About her visit. About you. And because I saw the notebook." And blinked. "You went through my things." "No. She showed it to me. She said it was your writing from the guest room." My chest tightened. That notebook held every word I ever bled onto the page. Every betrayal, every moment they left me alone, every tiny victory. And now Jared had read it. "Why now?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "Because I thought I had time," he said. "Time to fix things. Time to prove I was right to take over. But I was wrong. You were right all along. I buried you when you needed help standing. I didn't just fail as a son. I failed as a man." A silence passed between us. Heavy. And yet, in that silence, something cracked open. Door. A sliver of possibility. "I don't need your guilt," I said. "But I appreciate your honesty." He looked up. "Is there any chance we can fix it?" I leaned back, feeling the weight of 70 years and 100 wounds press against my spine. "Not all at once," I said. "But healing doesn't need a calendar. It just needs the truth." He nodded. "Then I'll start with this. I stepped down from the company last month." I raised a brow. "To focus on making things right. With you. With Ruby. With myself." That I didn't expect. "You didn't tell the press," I said. "No," he replied. "Some things aren't headlines. Some things have to be lived quietly." For the first time in years I believed him. Later that afternoon, after he'd left, Ruby stopped by again. She brought over a peach pie and a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten invitation. Tulip Revival Gala. Honoring resilience, wisdom, and comebacks that changed the world. I stared at the card, my throat tightening. You planned this? Yes. He grinned. You think Cheryl and I let you do all the heavy lifting? Grandma, please. This is your stage. You just didn't know it yet. And you think people will come? People? She laughed. The mayor RSVP'd already. You're a local legend. I shook my head in disbelief. Not long ago I sat in silence, begging for someone, anyone, to remember I was still alive. Now I was about to stand in front of hundreds and tell them how I'd rebuilt everything from a chair in the corner. Not for applause, but for power. The night of the gala came quickly. The event hall, once a dusty warehouse, had been transformed into a garden of lights and velvet drapery. Tulips lined the walls. Music drifted through the air, soft piano notes echoing like memories made new. I wore a sapphire dress. Cheryl pinned a silver brooch at my collar that once belonged to her grandmother. Ruby did my hair. The crowd waited. Whispers hushed as I stepped onto the stage. And for a moment I stood in silence. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted to remember the quiet of the room they locked me in. The sound of my pen scratching on paper. The laughter I wasn't invited to. The tears I wasn't allowed to cry. And then I remembered the voice they tried to bury. So I spoke. And the world listened. If this chapter stirred something in your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late for a comeback. Drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated but chose to rise anyway. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned. I always believed that the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. That night, as I stepped onto the gala stage, the applause was distant, a dull roar compared to the thudding in my chest. My cane tapped the wooden floor like a metronome, counting down the moment I'd feared and dreamed of in equal measure. The lights burned warm. The microphone trembled beneath my fingers. I could smell the faint scent of tulips in bloom and perfume on borrowed gowns. Rows of faces blurred together into a living painting of expectation, curiosity, and disbelief. My granddaughter Ruby stood just off stage, her lips mouthing, "You've got this." And I did. Because the silence had already done its worst. What was left now was mine to reclaim. I leaned toward the mic and began. My name is Lillian Prescott. Some of you know me. Most of you don't. I used to be the woman who baked the pies at the church bazaar. The lady who smiled quietly from the front row of Rotary meetings. The grandmother who forgot names and asked the same questions twice. Soft laughter trickled in. But I remember every single thing. The laughter stopped. I remember the smell of antiseptic on the hospital pillow where I nearly died. I remember my son's voice when he said, "She's not what she used to be." I remember the cold of that corner chair, where I was parked like a plant someone didn't know how to water. Eyes were wide now. Some mouths had gone slack. I remember what it felt like to be buried alive in my own skin, told to stay quiet, stay seated, stay forgotten. And I remember every long night I spent retraining my body and mind, learning again how to hold a pen, type on a keyboard, read ledgers, run numbers, write contracts. I did it when the house was silent. I did it when no one believed I could. People leaned forward. I was underestimated. But that's nothing new for women of my generation. What they didn't expect was that I would rebuild what they tried to tear down. Not for revenge, but to prove that value never dies with age. And that no stroke, no betrayal, no cage they try to lock you in, can silence a soul that refuses to quit. The applause that followed felt like thunder after decades of drought. A standing ovation, some tear-streaked faces in the crowd, people who saw themselves, their mothers, their grandmothers in me. I wasn't just Lillian anymore. I was a symbol. Comeback. A revolution in gray hair and wrinkled hands. After the gala, reporters approached. Stories were written. A video of my speech went viral, posted by Ruby and captioned simply, "She rose." But not everyone clapped. 2 days after the gala, a sleek black car parked across the street from my home. A man in a sharp suit came to the door. I didn't recognize him, but the chill in his eyes felt familiar. He handed me a letter. Inside was a cease and desist from Jared's former business partner, Richard Sanford, the same man who tried to edge me out of the original company a decade ago. Apparently, my speech had stirred up more than pride. It had also reawakened buried contracts, forgotten equity stakes, and, most importantly, loyal clients who now wanted me at the helm. "You're a threat," the man said, his tone flat. "They want you to back down." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Tell Richard I've had a stroke, not a lobotomy." He blinked. "Now get off my porch." What followed was a storm. Media coverage exploded. Women's groups rallied around me. Aging advocacy networks reached out. Small business owners, many of them older, sent me messages of thanks, of solidarity, of hope. But the bigger ripple came from inside my own family. Ruby and Cheryl came by often, helping me field messages, sort through invitations, and manage interviews. They made tea, massaged my feet, protected my inbox. But Jared stayed quiet. Until one morning, he showed up unannounced. He stood in the doorway with a look I'd never seen before. Not anger. Not pride. Shame. "I read the letters," he said softly. "From women all over the country. They say you gave them permission to believe again." He nodded. "They're not wrong." He walked to the kitchen window, stared out. "I didn't just lose my company, Mom. I lost who I was supposed to be. And you found who you were, even after everything." There was silence. And then I said the thing I'd been holding for weeks. "You can still become the man I hoped you'd be. But you have to let go of the man you were raised to be." He turned to me. "Do you forgive me?" "I'm not there yet," I said. "But I'm not in the corner anymore. And that's a start." The next week, Cheryl, Ruby, and I hosted the first Grey Thunder Workshop, a community event where elders gathered to brainstorm business ideas, share skills, and support one another in turning wisdom into enterprise. We had bakers, bookkeepers, woodworkers, retired lawyers, and seamstresses. And in the middle of it all, I stood tall, cane in hand, heart wide open. Because I had more than a story now. I had a movement. If you're still moved by these stories, leave a comment about a time someone underestimated you, and how you proved them wrong. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded. Age is not a limit. They say success changes people. But I think success just shows who they were all along. After the workshop, I started getting emails. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. People from small towns in Nebraska, from retirement homes in Florida, from big cities like Chicago and Boston and Phoenix. They wrote about how they had been cast aside, how they'd sat in those same metaphorical corners, wondering if their usefulness had expired with their last paycheck or milestone birthday. One woman wrote, "I've been crocheting blankets for 30 years and thought no one cared. After watching your story, I started selling them online. I've made more in 1 month than I did in the last year." A retired accountant shared, "Your speech gave me the push to help small businesses balance their books again. I feel alive for the first time since my stroke." And another, "My daughter told me I was losing it. I just signed the lease on a storefront for my vintage clothing line." Every message was a spark. And sparks become flames. So Ruby, Cheryl, and I built a fire. We officially launched Grey Thunder Incorporated, a business incubator specifically for senior entrepreneurs. We helped people set up Etsy shops, start consulting services, and share their art, baking, or music with the world. We even created a mentorship program where seniors helped each other. Because who said mentorship had to be one way? We weren't just proving people wrong. We were building an army of late bloomers. And the press. Oh, they caught on quickly. I still remember the morning the Today Show called. "Mrs. Prescott, we'd like to invite you to New York. We want to share your story live." I nearly dropped my tea. "Live?" I repeated, blinking. "Yes, ma'am. You're inspiring millions." My hands shook as I hung up the phone. I turned to Cheryl, who had overheard the call and already had tears in her eyes. "You're going to show them," she whispered. "You're going to show the entire world what they tried to hide." The flight to New York was surreal. First class thanks to the show. Ruby held my hand the whole time. The skyline looked like a dream from the airplane window. When we arrived, a car picked us up and drove us straight to Rockefeller Plaza. Hair, makeup, microphones, it was all a blur. But the moment I walked onto that studio floor, I remembered who I was. Not the woman in a chair. Not the fragile figure in the corner. I was the storm they never saw coming. Savannah Guthrie smiled warmly and said, "Lillian, your story has touched so many. What would you say to people who think their best years are behind them?" I leaned in and said, "Your best years are the ones where you're seen. And if no one's looking, you stand anyway. You make them look." The segment went viral. Over 11 million views in a week. But back home, not everyone was thrilled. 2 days later, I got a call from my son, Jared. He'd been watching, of course. "I didn't know you were going to expose everything," he said quietly. "Expose?" said Jared. I told the truth. He sighed. "It's embarrassing. People are talking." "Good," I snapped. "Let them." That night, Jared showed up at my door again. This time, he didn't come to argue. He came to apologize. "You were right, Mom," he said, sitting across from me. "I was scared. Scared of losing my company. Scared of what people would think. And deep down, I think I was scared of you, becoming more than I ever managed to be." His words sat heavy between us. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he continued. "I just want to help now. If you'll let me." I studied him. There was a boy in his eyes, the one I used to rock to sleep. But there was also a man, flawed, bruised by pride, maybe finally humbled. "You can help," I said slowly. "But you don't get to lead." He nodded. That was enough. The next week we held a press event. Big one. Grey Thunder was expanding nationally. We partnered with libraries, community centers, and even tech companies interested in training seniors on digital tools. I stood on stage beside Ruby and Cheryl. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. And I told them one last story. I told them about the day I had my stroke. About the moment I forgot my own name. About the chair in the corner and the whispers behind closed doors. But then I told them about the books I read at midnight. The keyboard I retrained my fingers on. The mistakes I made and the victories I stole back. "I lost the world for a while," I said. "But I found myself. And sometimes that's the better deal." The room was silent. And then came the applause. Long, loud, lasting. Later that night we celebrated. Music. And a message from a startup investor. "Have you considered franchising Grey Thunder?" The email read. "We'd like to help you go global." My jaw dropped. Ruby nearly screamed. "I think Grandma just went international," she whispered. I laughed until tears filled my eyes. Not bad for a woman who once couldn't say her own name. Not bad at all. If this left you feeling hopeful, leave a comment below about someone you know who's thriving in their later years. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe. There's something funny about circles. You think you're moving forward, far away from where you began. And then one day you find yourself standing in the same place, but you're no longer the same person. That's what it felt like the day I returned to Jared's office. The very same room where, not long ago, I had once been wheeled in like a burden. Where they spoke over me like I was a nuisance. Where they talked about my value like it had expired. Now I walked in on my own 2 feet. Not hurried. Not proud. Was whole. The staff stood when I entered. Not out of obligation but out of something else. Respect. Jared had asked me to come. He wanted me to speak at the company's quarterly meeting, to tell my story. To inspire the younger team. He said they needed to hear about resilience. I agreed, but on one condition. I wouldn't be speaking at a podium. I'd be speaking from the chair they once sat me in. The same corner, same lighting, same carpet. I had asked them to place it back exactly as it had been. Reminder. Not for me. For them. I sat in that chair once more, looked out over the stunned crowd and smiled. 6 months ago, I began. I was placed in this corner and told to rest. To recover. But what they really meant was be silent. The room was still. Is fixed. I was told I was too old, too slow, that my words didn't matter anymore. But I want you to remember something. The corner where they left me became the corner where I rose. I saw heads nodding. I saw people tearing up. And when I stood up from that chair, I left it empty, for good. Gray thunder exploded in the months that followed. We expanded across all 50 states. Partnerships poured in from universities, tech companies, and even the Small Business Administration. We trained over 10,000 senior entrepreneurs in the first year alone. But the true reward, it wasn't the interviews or the magazine covers or the keynote addresses. It was the letters. One in particular came in a red envelope with floral trim. I opened it, curious, and found the shaky handwriting of a woman named Francesca in Boise. She wrote, "Dear Mrs. Prescott, my daughter told me I wasn't cut out for the digital world. I believed her until I saw your interview. I started painting again. Put them on Etsy. I sold 3 last week. Thank you for reminding me that age is not the end. Sometimes it's the beginning." I pressed that letter to my chest and wept. Had been worth it. All of it. Ruby moved in with me for good. She turned my sunroom into a mini office space. I wrote a memoir. Cheryl handled the marketing. We called it Thunder After Silence. It debuted at number 2 on the nonfiction list. But there was something else I wanted to do. Something I couldn't ignore. One evening, I sat across from Jared in his kitchen. I looked him in the eyes. "I want you to give that chair a plaque," I said. He raised a brow. "The one in the corner?" "Yes." He smiled. "What should it say?" Paused. Then answered. "In this chair, a woman was forgotten. In this chair, she remembered who she was." We installed the plaque in the office lobby. Some employees still stop to read it, puzzled. Others know the full story. Some even bring new hires over and whisper, "That's where the legend began." I don't mind. Let the whispers ripple. Let the stories pass on. Let my silence echo loud. On my 81st birthday, Grey Thunder celebrated its biggest milestone yet. We launched our first international hub in London. I gave a speech on video, live-streamed across countries. I ended it with this. They told me I couldn't even spell the word business after my stroke, so I wrote it in capital letters. And now the world reads it in mine. The crowd stood. So did the tears in my eyes. I still keep the old keyboard I used to relearn words. It sits on my desk like an artifact. The paint on the letters is faded, and the space bar sticks. But to me it's not broken. It's proof. Proof that healing doesn't happen in hospitals. It happens in the moments when you're left behind, but refuse to disappear. Now, every morning when I wake, I speak one word out loud before I even swing my legs over the bed. Power. Because I remember what it was like to feel powerless. And now I own the word. If you made it to the end of Lillian Prescott's incredible journey, let her story remind you that the strongest voices often rise from the quietest corners. Share this video with someone who's ever felt underestimated. Comment, "I rise too," if you're ready to take your story back. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional, empowering true stories every day.